Anyway, again, today's webinar is with me, attorney Ryan Hugh, awesome realtor Aaron Cooper, awesome attorney Timothy White joining us from, but with regard to what today's topic is we're talking about rental investment properties, and Aaron's going to give us a little insight about the Honolulu market. And then Tim and I are going to give attorney points of view based on our kind of areas. So again, sorry, re-intro, because Ryan forgot to hit the record button. Aaron, if you could intro yourself.
Yes, thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks so much for having me. So brief intro about myself. So I've been a broker here in Hawaii for the past 18 years. One of my passions has always been working with investors. So I'll just start off and talk about that process a little bit and what that looks like. So when I consult with a prospective investor, we always talk about we talk about having a strategic approach. And really what that means is determining the goals that they have and that they're trying to achieve. And generally speaking, there are three good options when you look at investing. And you need to put yourself in one of these categories. Two major groups, and then the third is kind of a bonus. So the first is the investor that's looking for that cash flow on a monthly basis. They want a cash flow property. And you'll hear terms thrown around such as cap rate. I want a good cap rate. I'm all about the cap rate. And so this is your cash flow on a monthly basis. This is a short-term rate, which can be an initial investment. So when you're looking to cash flow a property, you're looking to make your initial investment, and then you want to make it back on a monthly basis. So that would be the first point. The second, and I'll talk more about this because this is where we really shine here in Hawaii, and this is going to be your Honolulu market update. This is investing for long-term appreciation. So if you look historically in the Honolulu market over the last 30 years, we really have enjoyed some appreciation. And I'll just give a real quick example of this. And this is how I work for my clients within my real estate practice. I sold a property to a client about 8 years ago, and he was going to be stationed here in Hawaii for a few years. But we did have the approach when purchasing the property via a VA loan that he would be keeping it for a long term. So he PCS'd a few years ago, and I set him up with a property manager, and he's been renting out the property. He has not enjoyed a huge cash flow. However, he came to the table with very little cash per this VA product and was basically breaking about even every month. So he's been content with that for the past 8 years. He purchased the property for $325,000. Going through my market stats as I do on a quarterly basis and just thinking of my different clients, I did a market analysis on his property and determined the current value would be about $560,000. So I gave him a quick phone call and just said, you know, this is your update. Here's what the market is doing. And he said, it's worth $560. Great. I think it's time to sell. So now we're going to be putting that property on the market, and he's going to be making a few $100,000 that he's going to put towards the purchase of a larger home that he's going to be purchasing on the mainland. So I just wanted to give this example of how investing for long term and having appreciation can be a very, very effective strategy. So that's the second point that I have. And the third, and this is very popular, so I had to bring it up. This is flipping properties. So this, in my opinion, is risky. So it's not for everyone, and should only be done with a very, very strategic approach and with trusted partners involved, such as realtors, attorneys, contractors, et cetera, et cetera. So those would be the top 3 examples of why someone would invest and the different ways that they could invest and what they can expect in return. So to summarize, I'll just give a couple of tips, what I always call my do's and don'ts. So under the do's section, I would say if you're going to invest, always have trusted professionals that you want to work with. Again, realtor, legal, contractor, property manager. It's very, very important to not have a do it yourself, do it all myself approach. The second would be open to different areas. I think that this is very, very important. When you're going to be investing, it's much different than purchasing a property that you're going to be living in. So it's very important to not have the perspective of, I wouldn't live here. It's not about you, it's about your tenants. It will be their home, and it's ultimately about the dollars. So do not get attached to a particular area. And then finally, do always keep your property in good, safe condition. Not only will you stay out of legal trouble, which I'm sure Ryan and Tim can elaborate on more, but you will attract the tenants that you will want to have in your property and that will appreciate it and take care of it. So then on the don't side, I would say the biggest one, and this is very important for us here in Hawaii, is do not invest in properties that have high monthly maintenance fees. Or buildings that are notorious for having issues. Waikiki is a really good example of this. So what's going on in Waikiki is a lot of the properties are really old, and they're having to do spalling repairs and major plumbing repairs, millions of dollars literally. So not only would you have a high maintenance fee, but it's going to keep going up. So I always tell people, in all honesty, maintenance fees go up, they don't go down. So that's the number one tip I have for investing. And then the second would be, don't buy a property with a lot of deferred maintenance, and older homes that have termite damage and deferred maintenance, because that's going to just be, a way to throw away money, and basically any cash flow that you would be getting on a monthly basis at the end of the year would go towards a new roof or termite damage and things of that nature. And then finally, don't be attached to specific outcomes or financial gains. If you're going to be an investor, you must have some level of flexibility, and above all, a healthy cash reserve. So those are my top tips, and that's a little snapshot of the Honolulu market. So I'll turn it back over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Erin. That was great. Just letting everybody know, I told Erin and Tim, and we all agreed that we would kind of keep brief, basic, topical kind of questions just to get everybody on the same page, but also present the kind of, if you're new to this, the situations that we're talking about, you would have some basic familiarity. But we will open it up to questions once Timothy is done with his portion, who he's going to jump in after me. So use the Q&A function, and then you can also do the raise hand, but we'll be doing more dialogue and discussing with you guys. So if you do have questions, they're a little bit more specific, but you're not asking specific advice of any of us, disclaimer. We're happy to discuss those. But with that, my portion is a little bit from the business attorney's perspective. And what I mean by that is generally potential clients and current clients, after they've chatted a little bit with Erin, or usually in a situation where they're considering their first investment property or rental income property, the question always invariably turns to, I need to protect my assets. I need to hold on to because it's my investment. That's what I'm getting at. And frequently they are not really quite sure what that means. They just know they have to do it. From a business lawyer's perspective, because there's other tools to use, asset protection for me means basically using business entities to hold those assets. Why does that confer asset protection? Well, LLCs and corporations have this thing called liability, and that is usually how you get the asset protection. They have limited liability. The limitation in liability comes when you form a business entity. You usually contribute some type of asset, money. And usually with that money, these investors or people seeking property use their LLC to buy and hold the title of the property. Why is that important? Why is that critical to this whole asset protection thing? Well, what happens is you're separating your assets. The LLC or their corporation holds the property. Your personal assets remain yours on the side. And therefore you have basically what I like to call separation of identity. So how does this all kind of play out, and kind of what is the best way to think about this? I usually use the terms inside liability and outside liability. inside liability referring to inside the real property, the asset, the property that you're investing in is that, you know, your tenants or their guests could get injured. You could get into a buyer-seller dispute. There's issues with the property, and there's liability that arises from that, disputes that rise from that. Additionally, especially if you're the type of person that is seeking real estate investment advice or help, typically we see this with lawyers, doctors, accountants, dentists who are beginning to add into their real property investment. And what happens is that they have malpractice. That's what my business partner does. He's a personal injury and litigation attorney. So I'm keenly aware of what he's kind of looking for. But in terms of outside liability, we all do things daily. We go to work, we drive our car, and that can be dangerous. All those have inherent risks. And the reason why I say it's outside liability, it's outside as to the property, is you could also get in a lawsuit from that. But notice that what we've done is by setting up LLCs and corporations to hold real estate or rental income properties, is there's a separation. And so the liabilities fall on the business entity for its liabilities, obligations, and debts, and your liabilities from, say, a car accident, malpractice, whatever, in terms of that falls on you. So that's kind of how we manage risk, and we do separation of identities and separation of entities. Because LLCs and corporations are separate legal persons from the owners of the business entity, they're not living, breathing persons like you and me, or Aaron or Tim. They're more like the virtual background in Tim's case, is that they exist and there's some realness to them, but they're a legal fiction. But because they're a legal person, they can be sued, which is kind of what you want. You want to target the entity rather than yourself in certain situations. And they can own property. They're a legal person. That's what it means. Really quickly, 2 other topic areas. By the way, I'll be sharing a little cheat sheet that I did this for this webinar after the fact. But 2 other big topic areas before I'm going to hand it over to Tim is when you're getting into the business entity formation, and in particular when you have what I'd say business partners or investment buddies, or sometimes people like to create clubs, it is better to have some type of business entity, and we go with an LLC. It's pretty rare for there to be a corporation. It's just because LLCs tend to be flexible. And a lot of times you want this beyond the asset protection of having an LLC, especially if it's not your spouse that is holding this rental property in an LLC, because you want to avoid the tenants in common issue. Because tenants in common means that if Aaron's my partner and Timothy's my partner, we buy this fabulous property, she holds a third interest, I do, and so does Tim. But that means we could, as tenants in common, I could always sell my third interest to somebody else. They could have a complete stranger. When we have the LLC and business members and owners, usually we draft a well-drafted operating agreement, which covers, an operating agreement is a contract amongst the business partners and says what we're doing with this LLC entity. And because no one LLC member, which is what we call owners of an LLC, owns the property, the LLC owns the property, no one can convey title of that property to some random stranger. Not to mention, in terms of an operating agreement, we usually lock in fellow buddy investors, partners, and things like that with what we call first right of refusal, is that they have to sell their ownership interest back to the group rather than kind of selling there to some stranger. And those are the ways that we kind of protect the investment, protect each other, business partners from each other, and kind of setting up a legitimate business entity to kind of hold this investment. Really quickly, other issues, and Tim's going to talk about succession planning, but other issues is we talk about management, money issues. You don't need to be all equal. In my example, Aaron was a third, I'm a third, Timothy is a third. People come in with different amounts of cash or assets and different interests. We can always use the flexibility of the LLC to kind of address those. Last major part is compliance issues. I always tell people, you know, we do this whole rigmarole of setting up an LLC, and then they start taking the rental income from the rental property and putting it into their personal checking account. And I'm like, we just spent this whole time separation of identity and assets and trying to convince you that this LLC is a legal person. So therefore, you have to follow that and set up a separate business checking account. That's usually one of the first things people do. Other major issue when it comes to money, taxes. When you are conveying property from yourself to your LLC, they're separate entities, they're separate legal persons. And here in Hawaii, if some of you have California friends, when we do this, usually in California there's no tax, but here in Hawaii we have conveyance and transfer tax. That is, when you convey something of a lot of worth to somebody else, you can say it's $0. That is, you know, you're transferring your real property investment from yourself to your own LLC. But again, it's still the concept of separate identities. And so therefore you're gonna have to pay a conveyance tax. A lot of people are unaware of that. And when they get to the Bureau of Conveyances or filing, they're like, what tax? Because it's not the same as a living trust, which is Timothy's part, which he'll cover after this. One other major topic area that I wanted to cover before we transition over to Tim is a lot of people, and I'm going to probably ask Aaron of this when we get to the Q&A, is a lot of people first started out buying property here in Hawaii due to the short-term vacation rental kind of scheme for Airbnb and VBRO. Thanks, even before COVID-19, and you can see this in Kauai and probably Maui, after the fact that Honolulu decided to act in a very, in my opinion, maybe a little too draconian, but kind of just killed everything. But I think those in Kaneohe and Kailua are probably very thankful for that they don't have so many. But the main thing for short-term vacation rentals in COVID-19, in a post-COVID-19 world, is it's probably trending against it. And the thing is I think people want that. But the reason why I bring this up is people who buy from outside of the state are sometimes unfamiliar with the local state and local county ordinances and regulations. And what some realtors are sometimes unexpected when they're helping their clients and stuff, doesn't realize that a lot of times property laws, zoning laws, condo association situations are really based on their locality. And why I'm bringing this up is the rules for Maui, the rules for Kauai, and the rules for Hawaii and the rules for Oahu are different. If you just check the news, Mayor Kawakami on Kauai just signed a memorandum of understanding with Airbnb about what they're supposed to do when trying to register and rent out their short-term vacation rentals. So that is something that's really crucial that I kind of, especially with COVID-19, is you need to check your contract and your relationship if you're going to do it on one of these terms of online platforms, Airbnb and VBRO, because usually their contracts are not drafted in favor of the end renter user, nor is it drafted in the favor of the person providing the short-term vacation rental. It is drafted in a way to protect the interests of the platform. So a lot of people experience, as just an anecdote that I had somebody ask me, is, well, I followed Airbnb's whole COVID-19 and the property owner isn't giving me my money back. I was like, well, did you follow everything? Yeah, I did. And so what I had to explain to them, likely what the scenario is that the property owner probably already spent all the money, and your only recourse is to deal with Airbnb, who basically says, take it up with the property owner. So you get into this vicious kind of cycle of, well, who am I to blame? And your money's gone, and now you're sitting in some other state trying to track them down. For the property owner, though, it just kind of shows you is that VBRO and Airbnb are probably not necessarily going to kind of help you out, other than to kind of be a deflection point. With that, that happy topic and happy note, I'm going to kick it over to Tim, who's going to talk about aspects of estate planning, because I mainly focused on the business and asset protection part, but there can be asset protection with some types of estate planning. But a lot of times we see here in Hawaii is that a lot of families invest with their kids or other generations in mind, and they want to hold this property on. If it is exactly how Erin was talking about a long-term strategy, and this is an even longer-term horizon. But I'll let him take it away.
Right, thank you, Ryan. Timothy Mahiai White. I'm an estate planning attorney. I have had my own practice for about the last 5 years. My office is in Kaneohe, but I practice all over Oahu and the Big Island, actually. Ryan primarily talked about forming the LLC, what the LLC is for the inside liability and the outside liability. LLCs are for liability planning. What I do with estate plans is I plan for incapacity planning, succession planning, and ease of administration if you get sick or you die. So I deal with the fun part of getting your stuff to your beneficiaries and your family. So incapacity planning is who's going to make decisions for you if you are still alive with your assets, and succession planning is where's your stuff going to go when you die. And ease of administration has to do with how easy is it going to be for your beneficiaries and your trustees and anyone taking care of your estate to how easy is it going to be for them to administer everything, to wrap everything up, to make your wishes go through. We get to this interesting juncture of law with LLCs and estate planning when people do acquire these rental properties, because they put these rental properties, these investment properties in the LLC for the purpose of truncating liability, but they still want to be able to pass it on to their kids or to certain beneficiaries. So part of that has to do with what Ryan mentioned earlier, the well-drafted operating agreement, the well thought out operating agreement. If you don't have one of those, the law has a built-in procedure of what's supposed to happen. There's some buybacks, but the well thought out operating agreement is the way to go, because in your operating agreement, you can put things in there that will say this property, succession planning wise, can go to your heirs and descent. It can transfer through the court process to your children, or it can transfer with a trust. Generally, ease of administration, the third main reason I draft estate plans, is usually the main reason people are getting estate plans, because it makes it easier. With transferring your LLC, you can put an LLC in a trust. The ownership goes in a trust. So you acquire your investment property, put into an LLC, and then have your LLC owned by the trust and your trustee. So, and your operating agreement has that well thought out provision that allows you to pass it using a trust. And I generally draft revocable living trusts. And so when you die or become incapacitated, your successor trustee steps into your shoes, and they can now run this rental business for your benefit while you're alive, collect those rental checks, deal with a good property manager or manage the property themselves. And then when you die, they can either continue that business within the trust if your trust lasts for that period of time, or if the trust ends, they can work on distributing that asset according to your wishes. So you can have some dead hand control is what it's called. So you can say this LLC goes to this child, and this child has to keep it within the trust for asset protection and some other various reasons. But you can really control what happens to that LLC after you're gone, and that investment property for a specific amount of time. Yeah, that's most of what I have to say. Some follow-up about what Ryan mentioned about asset protection for properties. When clients come to me and they have rental property, and they realize that they have to pay a conveyance tax, and there's some extra work that has to go into forming an LLC. Sometimes they get turned off about that, and they want to just keep the property in their own name. And there's some built-in asset protection with the way that properties are held, held in title. So there's 3 ways you can hold property in Hawaii. There's tenants, or 4 ways. Tenants in severalty, which is just you yourself. Tenants in common, which is the example Ryan had with all 3 of us owning a third. There's joint tenancy, where if the example is Ryan, myself, and Aaron, we'd all own a percentage of the whole, which means we own 100% all together. There's built-in succession planning with that. So if one of us dies, it automatically goes to the survivors. The 4th way to hold property is tenancy by the entirety. It's like joint tenancy, but only for married couples. So there's a benefit for getting married besides the other benefits, of course. If one spouse, say, runs someone over and their insurance doesn't cover the liability, that creditor cannot come. Sorry, I got automatically muted there. That creditor cannot come and sue to get the house that's held in tenancy by entirety, because this special tenancy has protection under the law. Joint creditors are different. So say if it's a mortgage company coming in, you didn't pay your mortgage, they can of course get that asset. Or if you have joint liability. Yeah, well, that's it for me. Any questions or concerns?
That was perfect, Tim. I'm going to.
As you can see, I'm at home, so my kids are here.
Yeah. No problem, no problem. We're all. Like I said, I had to move desks because my desk is kind of messy right now. I think I'm gonna kick off some questions that I have for you guys, but everybody else in terms of attendees, now is the time to kind of ask your questions. And if you could use the Q&A, and that's down in your little toolbar at the bottom, you can ask questions and I will read them to our panelists, and then I can kind of, we can go from there. But, you know, Aaron, the genesis of this idea was at the beginning of the year, I had a couple of inquiries about, you know, the LLC and asset protection. And, you know, when COVID-19 hit, there was I think everybody didn't know what was going on. So a lot of business transactions in general kind of stopped. As things began to pick up again, I started getting these questions, which is why I broached the topic with you guys to see if we could do a webinar, because it was like, oh, I guess interest is picking up. Maybe some people see opportunity in the market because there had been a number of news reports of people being overextended in terms of short-term vacation rentals. So trying to offload kind of properties. What are you kind of seeing in terms of the market itself?
Well, a couple of things, Ryan. So you had 2 questions there, really. So I'll start with the current state of the market, and this is post-COVID, of course. So surprising to a lot of people, but really what's happening right now is there is a lot of activity in the market, and really a frenzy, because there is this pent-up demand from the essentially 60 days that the real estate market really wasn't happening. So now we're starting to see the big move is for the military folks that are now coming into the state. So the market is just as brisk and busy as could be. Average days on market is under 30 days. We're getting multiple offers. So I personally put 3 homes on the market within the last few weeks, and all of them have received multiple offers, and 2 out of the 3 have gone for over the asking price. So that's what's going on currently. Now, the other point that you had was with regards to the Airbnbs. So that goes back to a year ago when Oahu made the decision to not have any Airbnbs. That goes back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of your cash flow, because those properties that were used for Airbnbs were cash flowing like crazy. Now, if you convert those Airbnbs into long-term rentals, the owners are losing their cash flow. So what we speculated would happen is that a lot of property owners would put their properties on the market because they couldn't forego the nice cash flows that they were receiving. with Airbnb. That really didn't happen with one exception, and that is the North Shore of Oahu. The North Shore, we did see late last year, a lot of those nice large estates, many of which were used for either pro surfers or pro surfing events during the winter time. Several of those properties were sold. However, the rest of Oahu, most of what we saw was that the owners successfully transitioned from the short-term to long-term rentals.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I didn't realize that about the North Shore situation.
Yeah, and you know, Ryan, that just goes to show that you know, if you're interested in a specific area of Oahu or you have a specific goal, it's really important to get in touch with a trusted professional that really has their finger on the pulse of that market, because it can be so different in different areas and different islands as well.
No, I kind of that sentiment, and especially at the beginning of your presentation about trusted professionals, plural. A lot of times what people don't realize when they come to a business attorney, estate planning attorney, or a realtor or financial advisor is that a lot of times we work in our silos. And yes, we do have networks and we have other people and we're always out for the best interest. Mm-hmm. A lot of people always ask like one question that's in your, and most people stay in their, what I call their lane or in their area mm-hmm. of expertise. And usually we depend on our clients to project map or like communicate with all of us. But I think working with a trusted professionals that are communicative and working on the best half can kind of achieve the goals with respect to these investment properties. But it is exactly that. I think most people that I send referrals to, whether they be realtors or staters, like they spend their mornings reading periodicals and checking the pulse of whatever industry they're in, and then checking in with their fellow professionals in other areas, is what they're seeing. And that's why we kind of do webinars and things like this too. And I think nowadays is collaboration is key. On that note, in terms of collaboration, Timothy, I have a question for you. A lot of times, you know, sometimes people get different ideas. They're not attorneys like you and me, and they're like, well, what can we use a trust? Why? I don't want to do the whole LLC thing. It's like, don't trust do asset protection. I know we mainly focus on the revocable living trust. Is there ever any time that you're considering an irrevocable trust?
I often get questions about that, about getting an irrevocable trust for, say, Medicaid planning or a domestic asset protection trust. And those are buzzwords that you can look up on Google and see what they are. You lose a lot of the control with these type of trusts. So you generally have to name a different trustee that you don't really have control over to get the benefits of the asset protection. And most of the clients that I talk to, when they hear that, they don't want to give the control. They want their cake and they want to eat it too. They want the asset protection and they want 100% of the control, which is generally not the case with these type of irrevocable asset protection trusts. And so I generally do not draft them, and I actually send those clients out to other attorneys if they want those types of trusts.
Yeah, to echo that, I've rarely seen that to be the case. That the clients that I see generally tend to this is their first or second, and they tend to be more middle-aged, as opposed to like this is some grand kind of generational skipping tax plan or other kind of, you know, what I call, instead of estate planning, I kind of call it family or clan plan. Like they want the family legacy to live on for ages beyond them. But for most people's purposes, in terms of segueing to my part, is that that's usually why we generally tend to use LLCs. I've rarely ever seen a situation where they want the money basically to pool, or that this is some kind of large business endeavor where a corporation is kind of ideal. So is because you also do small business planning, and I've rarely ever used a corporation.
I rarely use corporations as well. Sometimes when there's some income tax planning, you might want to use them, but most people just want a LLC for the ease of the administration, and I usually will help with those for the purpose of estate planning, really. Yeah, most people don't want the complex, huge asset building corporations. They're looking for the ease of administration with the LLC that you draft.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's the flexibility.
Yeah.
Aaron, do you frequent? Oh,
Oh, I just had a question for both of you, a two-part question.
yeah.
So the first is for you, Ryan. What is the timing like in terms of putting together an LLC? Can someone come to you when they've identified a property? What is your timing like?
So, in my little cheat sheet that I want to share, and I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't. Ideally, for me, they have approached me and thought about this asset protection before they're in escrow. That they're setting it up and they're like, the key thing with realtors, accountants, attorneys, and things like that is always the planning. I get that people sometimes jump into the situation after the fact, but you're just making it more difficult and sometimes not at all possible. The reason why I bring that up is the LLC formation part, especially if it's what we call a single member LLC, there's just one individual that owns the LLC, pretty straightforward and very simple. The complexity arises when you have, especially like I said, in these investment club situations, or it's a group of friends, and this is the first time that they're like, oh, let's flip a house or something. We can totally make, they don't realize there's a lot to go with the LLC situation. Added to that, especially when it comes to mortgages and lenders, especially if they're financing this and not not just purchasing it outright. Once the mortgage is on the property, most institutional lenders are reluctant, if not downright. In my experience, Wells Fargo generally just always says no. Transfer the property and allow you to convey it to an LLC, even if you kind of plead or kind of like, oh, the owners of the LLC will sign a personal guarantee. They just don't want to engage and bother in doing it. Other lenders are okay, and it depends on what kind of mortgage it is. But what I warn people is that if you do this and you have a mortgage agreement, you are violating the anti-transfer, anti-conveyance clause. In mortgage agreements, it says you will not convey interest in this property. And so some people forget the whole thing is the LLC is a separate person. And so you are conveying it, even if it's you owning it, you're conveying it to another person. So to answer your question my idea is that for planning is people approach us as soon as they identify, they know that this is what they want. In fact, a lot of times I just say, you can create a shelf company, and when you're ready and you find that Aaron has helped you find the perfect property for your goals, no, just the LLC is ready to go at that point. It's not that we're doing it at the same time. Tim?
Thanks, Ryan. So I think that goes back to, a common theme that the three of us have mentioned, and that is the three of us have a consultative approach with our clients and want to help them with a plan, strategic plan.
Yeah, and to your point, to Ryan, your point about when my clients have investment property, it's usually they bought the first one because they lived in it, and then they bought a second one and decided, hey, it's time for us to get an estate plan. They come to me and I have a conversation about LLCs, and that's when I see them generally. And so kind of it's kind of piecemealed. So if you're a seasoned investor, they have the right team. They have the loan officer, they have the realtor, they have the LLC person, the business attorney, they have the estate planning attorney. They have their team in place, and they're going on and identifying these properties and having the plan set up before. Those are generally seasoned investors, but a lot of people, they fall into this, and not everyone is a seasoned investor, and they fall into this oh, I have an investment property all of a sudden. Okay, where's all the pieces? And that's kind of why we're having this webinar, is so people can see you got to set stuff up. If you want to have a good approach, you got to have the right people in place.
Yeah, I'm sure both of you have the wonderful horror stories where people are last minute, not prepared, but they just want to get this done on a property. And you know, as much as a realtor wants to make a sale, I want to move on to the next kind of client project. And in terms of Tim is, you know, revocable trusts tend to not probably be too complicated. It's kind of like, no, we need you to sit down and kind of deliberate with us, because this is for you. This is not, I'm not invested in the property. This is your property. On that note, are you finding, Erin, that a lot of people are, it's husband and wife, or is it groups of people, or is it just singles in terms of looking at property right now?
The trend has definitely been groups of unrelated individuals that have been getting together to purchase properties.
Definitely pooling their resources. Yeah, it was like, it definitely makes your ability to buy a dream property that you might not be able to live in, but a group of you can buy together.
Yeah, and I think that's just a testament to the market in Hawaii, and because our properties are so expensive.
How about you, Tim? Do you sometimes get family, because you mentioned divorce, that's another issue that sometimes, and that's why I also brought up the family aspect, is a couple times I've seen before people get married, they have a rental income property already, and then they find somebody and then they get married, and then they have questions about asset protection. Is, you know, out of prenuptial planning and kind of all that, they then ask, is like, well, what are other ways that I can keep my well, I was like, well, the property is already, you filed it as such, but you know, to put it further kind of afield and kind of thinking about, I was like, you could develop it into a separate business entity, but that's kind of, you know, that's a discussion. But have you seen family planning questions on the divorce side for kids?
I get questions all the time about divorce. I'm not a family law attorney. I usually send that stuff out for prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements. LLCs are subject to divorce. There's a lot of stuff that goes into divorce law, especially because the courts here take a business approach to it. So
you're a little far away from your mic.
Sorry. If you didn't hear what I said, I generally don't do any divorce planning, but family planning wise, I generally have a discussion with my clients, and they're generally married people that come in that have separate marital property and marital joint property. And we'll talk about, okay, if there's a divorce, how do you protect this for your beneficiaries? Trust can do that. But for the purpose of investment property, I just treat it like it's regular marital property in the respects of trust planning.
Okay, does anybody have any last minute questions? Because I think that's all I have in terms of questions that I wanted to discuss with you guys. Do you guys have, Erin, do you have any last minute for?
I did. I had a final question for you and Tim. Did you guys want to comment on why someone would not go online to form an LLC or a trust, and why they would come to you instead?
Well, and I'll help answer that. We did get a question, but Tim, do you want to address that, the online aspect?
The online aspect, online doc prep services are sufficient if you can do all the background research and understand all the legal language and ramifications of what you're doing with those documents. If you can understand that and do all the research yourself, great. But that's why we have professionals, so you don't have to go to law school yourself to learn how to do these things. I'm not knocking doc prep services. They work just fine as long as you understand the information. But 9 times out of 10, when clients come to me with the online doc prep thing, I have to fix it. Do you want to comment on that first, Ryan, before I answer this question?
Just to echo what Tim said, I usually use the tactile kind of metaphor. Is it's like plumbing or electrician. Yes, there are a lot of people who are DIY and they're good at it, but the reason why you hire the plumber or the electrician or carpenter to help you fix up your home is sometimes there's some problems that you do not understand the plumbing or the electricity work or kind of setting in the molding and stuff like that. And yeah, if you don't know what you're signing off to or setting up and what you're downloading from online, it's not gonna turn out well. Just exactly like if you try and do your own plumbing and you have no idea what you're doing, you're gonna have the least of your problem is a leaky sink. So that's kind of the way I kind of express it with licensed professionals. It's just that for realtors and attorneys and accountants, our professional comes with trading and dealing with information and paperwork. Anyway, Tim, yeah, Amber asked, why wouldn't a revocation of trust be done? And I think that was the prior topic before we jumped in on this one.
Is it in regard to divorce?
Amber, is that what you're asking to? Is when we were, okay, yeah.
So when you get divorced and you go to court and get a divorce decree, the judge basically looks at your property. This is a very quick rundown of how it works. They look at your property, they divide it up based on the reasonableness of how they decide to do that. Like I said, I'm not a divorce attorney. When I get the divorce decree, and usually when I see someone that just got divorced or someone that's contemplating divorce, we have this chat. And if there is a joint trust, the assets in that trust are going to be subject to the divorce decree. And I'll go through that divorce decree and say, okay, this is how everything is titled. It's in the joint trust. Divorce decree says to take everything out and give it to the spouse. So you would have to do a revocation of trust to take care of getting that divorce decree to be enforced. Not always do you have to revoke the trust. I've done trust for people who got divorced but want to continue a trust for the purpose of estate planning for the kids, for their kids together. But it's not always necessary to do one, but most of the time you're revoking a joint trust when you get divorced.
Cool. Thank you for your question, Amber. We have 8 minutes left. Does anybody else have? Tim, do you have questions for me and Aaron?
Questions? Well, a lot of the questions I have for Aaron, I've learned in the past few weeks because I just purchased a condo. She was my realtor and really walked me through all the steps. I regularly draft conveyance documents to transfer properties, and this is kind of getting to why you shouldn't do online doc prep stuff. I definitely would, as an attorney who does conveyance documents, all the stuff that she did as my realtor, I definitely could not do on my own. I could probably do the research and do everything like that, but it would take much longer than the time that I need to get things done. So in that respects, having a realtor and on your side, on your team is a fantastic thing to do. You should always have a realtor when buying or selling your property.
Yeah, whenever I say I'm a transactional and compliance attorney and some lay people or was like, well, what does that mean? I, of course, tongue in cheek, just say I shuffle paper around. But I mean, that's partly true. But what it is what people don't understand is in an information-based society is that it's the content that we're putting down and filling out forms and things like that. And trained, experienced realtors, trained, experienced estate planners they can take and translate you're not lay people, you're not an expert in estate planning law, you're not an expert in real estate forms, but we are. And the thing is we're translating what you're telling us into where it goes. And yes, you can learn much of this. I find there are a lot of people who are very well experienced and this is their 4th or 5th investment property, yes, over time. But for the first person, this is not something I would say that you want to run as a test run, especially if you're plunking in hundreds of thousands of dollars for something that you're going to hold title to via whether it be an LLC or you're just doing a revocable trust for estate planning purposes for, you know, even if it is 3 to 5 years. I was like, and definitely not if you have a longer time horizon. Aaron, any questions? Everybody else, any other questions? Tim? Oh, okay. So other than that, I'm just going to thank everybody taking an hour out of their afternoon on Thursday at the beginning of what feels like March day 123. Other than that, all I would just say after this is I'm going to send some follow-up emails so you can get some of my talking points, and if Tim and Aaron have some notes they want to share with you on, we will email you. But hopefully we can do more of these. I definitely would love to collab with Aaron and Tim again for content. And maybe if any of you have other content or ideas for business, estate planning, or realty topics, go ahead and share them with us in response to my email. Other than that, any final?
Thank you so much.
Any final buys? Tim?
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon and have a great weekend.
Aloha.
I mean,
Bye.
some people are taking off Friday.